You were likely just notified on your screens that this webinar is being recorded, and I will share more on that momentarily. Let me pop up my slides. Alrighty, well, we are at noon, and I know a few more people will be coming in the next minute or so, but just in the interest of time, I will go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for joining us for this month's Your Hour with APA Virginia. The Berkeley Group is our generous sponsor of this series, so we're glad to have a few folks on from the Berkeley Group today. We have Naomi, Syodmak, Luke Peters, and Caroline Venturve with us. I'm really appreciative of their time. They will be presenting on integrated resilience, coordinated planning in the city of Petersburg. And you will see that this webinar is certified for mandatory credits as well as general credits. So I will place that information in the chat momentarily. Whoops. I will also be sharing a link to our website page. You'll notice that things are looking a little bit new on our website. It's still partly under construction, but things are a little bit more up to date. So you will see new information and opportunities listed there to get involved with the Virginia chapter. We really do encourage questions. Please use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat box to ask your questions. This will just help us keep track of all inquiries. Feel free to use the chat box if there's any open-ended questions or opportunities for engagement. You can also DM me if you have any logistical questions. During the more formal Q&A, feel free, to raise your hand to request to be unmuted to ask your question out loud. But otherwise, keep your eyes peeled on the chat box for links to the website, the CM credit number, and also to the YouTube page where this webinar recording will be posted in the coming days, where you can also find all previously recorded webinars in the series. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over. But thank you everyone for joining.
Great. So I'm Naomi Syodmak. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development with the City of Petersburg. I'm excited to be here with the Berkeley Group today to talk about integrated resilience, coordinated planning in the City of Petersburg. So first we'll start with just about Petersburg. I really want to get you all oriented. So Petersburg is about 25 miles south of the city of Richmond in Virginia. And I just want to share some demographics as well with you all, so you have a sense of who lives in Petersburg and what Petersburg is about right now. So the city of Petersburg is about 77% Black or African American and 17% white, compared to the Commonwealth of Virginia as a whole, which is 66% white and 19% Black or African American. And you can see on this slide as well that the median age of Petersburg runs slightly younger than that of the Commonwealth of Virginia at 35 years of age. I also wanted to share with you all here some information on household income as well as those that are employed and unemployed in the city. So you can see, especially in the far column, at all households under median household income, Petersburg is significantly lower than that of both the greater Richmond area as well as the Commonwealth of Virginia, at a household median income of $43,000 compared to $76,000 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Also, you can see that generally unemployment rate runs higher than that of the United States as well within the city of Petersburg. And I did want to point out too some of these other sort of negative things that we've heard about Petersburg and we're experiencing that we're trying to address, is that Petersburg has been ranked the least healthy city in Virginia. That was in the University of Wisconsin-Madison's 2022 County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. And I also want to share that 16.5% of households do not have access to a personal vehicle. So these demographics that I'm sharing with you are really steering our focus on sustainability in the city of Petersburg, how we're addressing social, environmental, as well as economic components of sustainability. So here you can see that our big focus right now in kind of bringing back and rising up in terms of social and environmental factors is really focusing on access and health in the city. So some things that we're trying to do is just take advantage of resources that have been out there that maybe we've overlooked in the past. So whether it's state funding, federal funding, or other grant opportunities. So some things that we're doing that have been really accessible and easy to access for us have been submitting application through the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program. So this is really emphasizing improving safety in the state of Virginia. And what was great during this is that VDOT hired consultants to assist us in submitting applications. So they did all the research in terms of where we have the most accidents, what we could make improvements on. They submitted the application for us, but we just hadn't engaged with that. And we hadn't engaged with that in the past. So we're really excited to see the results of that submittal, which we should be hearing about soon. And then there's Smart Scale. So this is an opportunity for us to receive some significant funding for regionally significant projects. So we're looking to submit for improvements to the interstates, I-85, I-95. Petersburg is one of those cities that's greatly impacted by infrastructure such as the interstate system. And we're hoping to submit for more projects than Petersburg has ever submitted before, which would be the maximum of 4 for this. And applications are due, or pre-applications are due, April 1st. And then Ready, Set, Go. This is an interesting one because I found out recently that we technically weren't eligible, but we did submit. And due to excess funding, we're being considered. So it's really exciting to hear about a happy mistake. So what this is an opportunity to be considered for transportation alternatives funding, which is focused on what it sounds like, alternatives to the automobile. So getting people on bikes, on trails, and we're submitting for a railroad crossing for the Appomattox Trail. So we're really excited. This would help us get prepared for transportation alternatives. So really help get the design work, initial research, and data together so we can have a formal application. And then there are those federal funding opportunities that we're looking to take advantage of. Thriving Communities provides consultant assistance for the city in order to enhance what we're able to do. And we should hear back about that shortly. I know we're making good steps because we did hear back about getting our letters of commitment from our partners. So we're just waiting for that final approval from the federal government. And then Safe Streets and Road for All. The application deadline opens up real soon. One coming up in April, hoping to submit in May, so we can get a safety action plan and help make improvements. We're really trying to focus on like that 16.5% that don't have access to a vehicle. And all of the infrastructure that's really impacting people, we're trying to make sure even we submit for Smart Scale, we're submitting with sidewalks included. We want to make sure that anyone can get around the city of Petersburg, whether they have a car or not. And then one I want to talk a little bit more in depth about is the Community Forest Revitalization Program. So next slide. So this one is in partnership with the Green Infrastructure Center as well as the Department of Forestry. And what we're doing with this partnership is looking to create a tree ordinance, a tree master plan and maintenance plan, and then would also follow that up with engaging community groups into planting different areas of the city that are important to them in order to ensure there's equity with park access and tree access as well. And then I really want to talk about how trees really address a lot of issues associated with sustainability. It looks at the social, the environmental, and the economic component. So as you can see, some of the data statistic points that I have here, it helps enhance public health. So lowering overweight and obesity rates, helping with asthma, high blood pressure, and then it also benefits the economy by encouraging people to shop longer and pay more on a trade-lined street. And then these little icons on the side really just show, of course, it helps with air quality, stormwater management, heat island, increasing property values, wildlife corridor creation, as well as encouraging people to be active and get outside. And then I want to talk a little bit more about what else is helping us move forward when it comes to being more resilient and sustainable, and that is having good partners and an interested community. So of course, working with the Berkeley Group, they've been really helping us realize our vision of what we'd want to see Petersburg as in the next 20 years with our comprehensive plan update. And we're so happy with that work. We're hopping into the next step of kind of helping realize that comprehensive plan through a zoning rewrite, and we'll be working with the Berkeley group with that as well. We also have partners through the Resilience Adaptation Feasibility Tool called RAFT. So that's a partnership with UVA that we have, and they have several goals that they focus on, really on diversifying the economic base, connecting people to services, capital improvements, and also addressing environmental issues like clean water and clean air. Some of the results we've seen have been super creative and just really exciting to see. So I guess that's what you get when you work with students at UVA. They come with these creative results. They don't really look at like what could hold you back, but you see a vision like this where they're like, let's daylight a stream in the middle of the city. Let's make that happen. And they realize what the benefits of those are. Like, it can be an economic generator by having streets that are pedestrian oriented right in the middle of the city and increase property values. So this is something that as we go into the next semester of working with the UVA students, we definitely want to see more of and get a better sense of cost and benefit associated with daylighting brick house run in the city. And then another thing we had the UVA students take a look at for us is really looking at what micromobility might look like in the city. We had a time where we're talking with bird scooters, and we're aware we're not quite ready. We don't have infrastructure in place for people to safely take a scooter from one point to the next. But we wanted to take a look at where might people be most in need of a scooter and where might they be going to. So really those purple areas on the map are the destinations, and then the other colors on the map reflect people in need that might need alternative modes of transportation or might need help addressing that first mile, last mile problem. So, and then I wanted to talk about our economic renaissance as well. It's really exciting to see the interest that's growing in Petersburg, helping us be more economically resilient and sustainable. So one thing that I wanted to feature here is that Petersburg is drawing more attention for its additional restaurants, art galleries, antique stores, and industry. I have a quote here on the bottom that there's a vibe and energy that seems to be suddenly coming out of Petersburg. So there's a lot of excitement about the city, its growth, its potential. And also, I wanted to note here that we're recently recognized as a tech hub, which is going to allow additional investment into our pharmaceutical and other industries in the city as well. But I do want to share that Petersburg still has things to address, and we're super excited about where we're going right now, but there's still a mindset shift that needs to be taken. So right now, when we talk about making transportation improvements, sometimes there's the thought, let's widen this road. We don't need sidewalks over here. We don't need a bike lane over here. So really just emphasizing the need to serve those that need alternative modes of transportation and the benefits of alternative modes. And then also trees. You can see in this picture here the before and after. It's not a before and after where we planted trees, it's a before and after where the trees have recently been removed. So there's a mindset from the businesses and the community that trees are negatively impacting the visibility of their establishments. So those were recently removed here in the city. So we're really working to engage the community to see the benefits, health-wise, economic-wise, of projects such as sidewalks, bike lanes, and planting trees. And then lastly, I do want to note that we also need to become more business friendly. Something that we have right now is the process for someone to set up a business in the city requires them to move from building to building, department to department to get their business license application completed. So we have challenges, we have things, mindsets to overcome, processes to overcome, but we're definitely excited for the future. And I do want to introduce now Luke Peters with the Berkeley Group. He's going to talk to you all more about resilience.
Thanks, Naomi. And yeah, I'm going to give everyone kind of a primer on resilience and keeping in mind all the initiatives that Naomi was just talking about and the ones that Caroline is going to talk about as I go through them. So taking the view from kind of a systems perspective, resilience kind of means anti-fragility, and an anti-fragile system, or a fragile system rather, is one that breaks whenever it's presented with a expected or unexpected shock. And that's usually the result of inflexibility or a period of stagnation and not having any other choices or backups. A robust system is one that can rebound from those shocks, but an actually anti-fragile system is one that becomes stronger from challenges and learns to adapt and grow. We can talk about the resilience of, say, a building and determine how strong it is or how many years it'll last, but ultimately we're concerned with human welfare. We only care about resilient things and systems in as much as they serve to protect people. And the humans themselves being resilient is also part of this. You know, individuals and their support structures being able to withstand the problems life faces them with. And a practical definition of resilience ought to include some mention of protecting the services that we all rely on in our normal daily lives, which is not only the functions of government and overarching public utilities, like being able to call the police or get a driver's license or make a phone call, but also things we're used to having for a functional, specialized economy, like getting groceries from the store or being able to drive or take transport to your job. And resilience requires dedicating resources, both beforehand in preparation and during the actual events that test our resilience. And that in turn requires some amount of prioritization. And we need to ask who exactly is benefiting from our efforts and how. You know, be sensible to finance the systems that have a track record of surviving events or that have fervent political support. But if your outcome is simply making life better, no matter who you are, we have to remember that those underlying realities that make an area more beneficial on paper to protect aren't evenly distributed. And so I kind of wanted to painfully dissect the state definition of resilience, wherein it means the capability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from significant multi-hazard threats with minimum damage to social well-being, health, the economy, and the environment. Anticipate here, you know, means know what you don't know. Consider your weak points ahead of time, like a SWOT analysis. Prepare for is the capability to prepare for hazards, including financial strength and flexibility, and having methods for handling problems as they arise already determined and practiced. Respond to is implementing your developed and practiced plans. You need to know who exactly is responsible for which duties in an emergency and how you're going to deploy resources, including the literal physical logistics and triaging. Recover from, that's the bouncing back part of resilience, where issues don't permanently cripple you. And it doesn't mean things can't change or won't be different, but those different new ways of doing things won't negatively affect the welfare of the community. And multi-hazard, you know, very often a hazard isn't the standalone problem. It's an extreme example, but consider Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. You know, the hurricane was its own issue, but it knocked out power and communications. There was physical damage from broken glass and trees and thrown objects. And when the storm surge overtopped and broke the levees, there was massive flooding, blocked major roads, prevented emergency responders from reaching people. People couldn't get out of the city or in, turned into a humanitarian and health chain reaction with food and pathogen problems, and even exposure to the elements as immediate threats. So you have to have the ability to stop threats before they cascade. And then the social well-being, you know, again, it's important to remember what we're actually trying to protect, except for the environment, which could be considered worth saving for its own merit. Social well-being and individual welfare encompass the things we're actually trying to be resilient for. We also here have a definition of urban resilience that we found that I thought was interesting. I wanted to point out one part in here, which was protecting identity. I think that's really important for a definition of resilience. And in fact, every locality should develop their own definition of resilience that sort of protects their unique identity. And so going back to that sort of systems analysis perspective, you know, how do we produce that system that's more anti-fragile, especially when the forces you're facing could be somewhat random? Distributed systems, one of the easiest ways to be more resilient using the tools that we have is to create distributed systems, meaning that if one node breaks down, you have others to compensate or fill the role of the broken node, sort of like a transformer in your neighborhood blowing up. if you have a distributed system, a couple folks will have solar panels or batteries or backup generators to keep their own power on and help their neighbors out so that the entire town isn't going to experience outages all at once. Then there's redundancy, which is a related concept, but it can mean a few different things. You can have complete duplication, kind of like storing all your data on 2 hard drives at once. There's the redundancy of easy replacements. When a queen bee dies, you can give royal jelly to a young bee and make a new queen. Or you can have multiple sources, like having gas and electric and bicycles to get around in addition to just cars. Adaptation is being able to change and grow in response to stress. If a system is set up so that it can only handle challenges in one way, the next time this challenge occurs, it'll be the same or even worse. And then flexibility, as planners, we generally only have a few tools at our disposal to deal with challenges of all sorts. Build higher walls, add more best management practices, give more funding, more staff, more money. But this also introduces a lot of weight into the system. And now you need all of that permanent full-time money for staff to administer grants and forever programs, which are worth building, but it's also worth thinking about how to retain some element of flexibility in those programs so that they're not all you rely on. And so the role of planning in resilience, emergency response and disaster management, this is where the resilience rubber often meets the road and tests whether our long-range plans are effective. Community engagement, not only is having a range of different ideas important to finding the best ones or making multiple ideas work at once, but it also ensures that you're protecting everyone's interests when you distribute resources for resilience. Creating a diverse economic base. If a locality only does one thing and that one thing is threatened into extinction, then so is the community. And equity, of course, as already mentioned, is important for making sure that planners distribute those resources to everyone who needs them, no matter who they are. So I wanted to talk about environmental resilience in particular as well. Some of these are self-explanatory or speak for themselves, but I wanted to pick a couple out and mention them. Wetlands are one of the most important natural resources. They protect from floods, storm surge, they filter water from nutrients and sediment, provide habitat for numerous creatures that make up the food web that we all depend on. And I also wanted to point out drinking water. I think that is something that has not been in vogue necessarily in a lot of planning efforts until recently, but it's obviously one of the most important long-term planning concepts for protecting humans for the future and communities, both above ground and below ground drinking water, and also public lands and publicly owned land. Not only having space to breathe, but also having the space to quickly try and solve problems if needed. If you're having a severe housing shortage, if you have publicly owned land, well, you could probably get public housing up faster than if you needed to purchase, raise, and otherwise transform other land. And now I wanted to pass it off to Caroline to talk about some of the initiatives that the Berkeley Group is doing in our planning efforts for Petersburg.
Thanks, Luke. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Caroline Vanterve, and I have been working with the city of Petersburg for around the past 2 years now on their comprehensive plan update. There's been a team of us at the Berkeley Group who have been working with the city, but I've been serving as a project management capacity, and I'm really excited to share some of what Petersburg is going to be working on for the next 5, 10, 20 years. A quick caveat as we talk about the comprehensive plan, the plan is in its final draft format. It has not yet been adopted. The Planning Commission public hearing is next week, and the City Council public hearing will be in May. We don't anticipate any major changes, though. We've been very fortunate to have a lot of community support and partnerships throughout this process, and certainly this plan would not be what it is without their support. And so we're really happy to have a lot of people who have been very engaged and enthusiastic about this process. So I'll begin by sharing a little bit about Petersburg's environmental assets. Petersburg is really fortunate to have some very diverse environmental resources and assets. Certainly the Appomattox River, which is perhaps the most well-recognized, one of the city's largest assets. The Appomattox River runs along the northern boundary of the city that's shared with Chesterfield County and Colonial Heights. Certainly is really valuable as a sensitive habitat, feeds into the Chesapeake Bay, but also is valuable for recreation, ecotourism, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, how that is all happening sustainably, excuse me. Parks and green space. Petersburg is really fortunate to have a large inventory of parks and green space, both larger and regional parks, but also smaller pocket parks and neighborhood parks. So that's certainly an asset for the community. Petersburg also has a trail network that has been significantly expanded over the past several years, thanks to the work of FOLAR and some other regional organizations that have been partnering with the city to develop the Appomattox River Trail. That's a regional trail connecting several different cities and counties in the region. And then the Fall Line Trail and the East Coast Greenway will also connect to Petersburg once those are developed. The Petersburg National Battlefield is a very important historic and cultural resource, but certainly has environmental benefits as well, especially when thinking about the tree canopy and forested area in the area. And then Petersburg also does have productive agricultural land on the south side of the city, and so that's a consideration as well. So thinking about environmental resilience, keeping all of this in mind, what does that actually look like in the comp plan? So according to FEMA, Petersburg has a very low risk of impact from natural hazards. The greatest risks for Petersburg are projected to be associated with hurricanes, tornadoes, and winter weather. And this is pretty consistent with what the city has seen historically. However, it's important to note that resilience, as Luke was talking about earlier, is very multifaceted. And so despite that overall low risk of impact, the city does have a very high social vulnerability, essentially meaning that the city's population is more susceptible to these hazard impacts when compared to the rest of the Commonwealth and the country. Petersburg also has a moderate ability to prepare for these anticipated hazards, adapt to these changing conditions, and quickly recover from disruptions, again, when compared to the rest of the state and country. So altogether, this essentially means that while severe weather events may be less frequent or less costly comparatively, Petersburg's community is more likely to have a harder time adapting and recovering than other communities in the state. And so from the standpoint of the comprehensive plan, this means making sure that there's a multifaceted approach to environmental stewardship, natural resource preservation, that has equity and environmental justice at the center. So there are kind of three buckets, I would say, three main buckets that the city is looking to for enhancing environmental stewardship and sustainability. The first is certainly compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. Petersburg is actually considered a tidewater locality. They have the Appomattox River flowing into the bay. And so the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance are required to include all required elements of the Bay Act. Additionally, thinking about how the zoning ordinance can go above and beyond and not just meet the minimum required by the Bay Act, but go further to enhance environmental sustainability and new development. Amendments could include addressing low impact development, requiring the submission of environmental inventories, limiting impervious cover, including requirements for protecting the mature tree canopy, in addition to encouraging the planting of native species, and then addressing invasive plantings as well. There are other zoning ordinance amendments, such as reducing parking minimums or encouraging the siting of rooftop solar, that are not only environmentally friendly, but also are very business friendly and serve to facilitate that goal of being a business friendly community, really a win-win for the city. If you're a Tidewater locality on this call, you're probably familiar with VIM's decision trees. If not, these are developed by the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. Essentially, Tidewater localities have comprehensive coastal resource management portals. And what these do is serve as a resource and guiding regulation and policy decisions regarding coastal resource management and shoreline erosion control. So certainly tapping into these resources, helping them, using them to guide decision-making as they exist, but also taking a look at training opportunities for city staff and relevant stakeholders to make sure they're staying up to date on the latest policies and best practices. Kind of in the same vein, creative public outreach opportunities can be developed to educate the community and stakeholders alike on some of these shoreline management and protection strategies, such as living shorelines. It's also a best practice to use a locality-wide regulatory structure as a means of encouraging and facilitating a more integrated approach to shoreline management. Environmental justice is certainly a really important aspect, if not the central aspect, of successful environmental stewardship over the next 20 years. Again, keep in mind that while Petersburg has that low risk probability with natural impacts, there's that higher social vulnerability and ultimately a lower resilience potential. So as Naomi mentioned earlier, trees are really important. They're often overlooked. It can be hard to build community support around trees. However, trees are really important in reducing heat islands. In Petersburg, a lot of the heat islands in the city are located and concentrated in its low income and minority neighborhoods. That is certainly a problem, especially because these groups are the most vulnerable to climate impacts, rising temperatures, natural disasters. And so wanting to be sure that heat islands are reduced in these areas, and that also the investments that are being made are data-driven. Scroll too far. The Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges, which includes Virginia State University and a few other colleges throughout the Commonwealth, recently did a heat mapping study for Petersburg and several other cities around the state. And so this is a really valuable resource that the city can take a look at to kind of drive its investment in heat island reduction. Adaptive reuse is also a very sustainable way of encouraging new development, especially when unused structures are able to be repurposed for services and amenities that are filling a gap in community need. So thinking about how abandoned or blighted structures can be repurposed for affordable housing, community hubs, healthcare, recreation centers, mixed-use development, that is beneficial in reducing blight, providing the community with services, but also can be very environmentally friendly as well. In the same vein, site remediation also helps facilitate new development, and this is particularly important in disadvantaged communities. In Petersburg and certainly elsewhere, these neighborhoods are statistically more likely to be living near or immediately around a known or potentially hazardous site. And then importantly, it's important to have intentional community engagement. So thinking about how the city can engage its community proactively rather than retroactively. A lot of times when community engagement processes happen, they are kind of occurring at the tail end of a process, asking for feedback, but thinking about how community engagement can be placed at the forefront so the community's needs and priorities are being considered all along the process. And then certainly land use as well. Addressing past injustices and deconstructing systems that continue to permit or encourage environmental inequities start with land use decisions. So in the comp plan for Petersburg, we wanted to be intentional about mapping development constraints, both natural development constraints such as floodplains and steep slopes, but also man-made development constraints. Petersburg is a very historic city. There are a lot of conservation easements. There's the battlefield. There are quite a few properties with deed restrictions that may preclude development. And so wanting to be sure these are accurately mapped in order to provide Petersburg with better guidance for directing viable development. This also helped serve as the basis for designating conservation areas on the city's future land use map. Again, wanting to make sure those conservation areas are protected, they're acknowledged. The city's current future land use map does not address all development constraints. The conservation area on its current future land use map does not protect all of these sensitive environmental areas, which not only makes them more vulnerable, but also can be misleading to an applicant. So wanting to be accurate in the depiction of these conservation areas, making sure they're protected and preserved for the next generation, and also make sure the future land use map is effective in directing applicants to desired areas for certain types of development. And then finally, providing guidance for incompatible land uses, encouraging incompatible land uses, for example, industrial uses, to provide enhanced buffering, screening, and then the city can implement this more fully through its zoning ordinance. So on your screen, you can see just a few examples of key strategies, thinking about reviewing and implementing TMDL action plans, amending the zoning ordinance to not only achieve full compliance with the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, but to go a step further and really encourage low impact development and environmental site design, locality-wide regulatory structures, heat island reduction, and then I would be remiss if I did not include transportation as a really important component of environmental sustainability, thinking about parking minimum reduction, requiring installation of bike racks, certainly EV charging stations, sidewalks, other transportation infrastructure improvements that can go a really long way in supporting environmental resilience. Now I will turn it really quickly back over to Luke, and he's going to share a little bit about some implementation and partnerships.
Yeah, just to comment on, the environmental sustainability portion as it relates to back to resilience. Some of these ongoing partnerships, the continuity of these relationships with organizations that are really environmentally minded is really important. The James River Association has been working in Petersburg for a long time and is responsible for getting some grants for some upgrades recently. Friends of the Lower Appomattox River covers the entire river, obviously, but is really active in Petersburg, not only doing park cleanups, but trying to do bigger trail and other improvements. There are some newer partnerships that Naomi has already mentioned, the RAFT program and the UVA Green Infrastructure Center. And then there's also the Crater Planning District Commission, which is not just Petersburg, but all the localities fanning south. But I would say for the ERMTF, the Environmental Resource Management Task Force, which brings together all of those localities as environmental planners and other staff, as well as some state agencies and other stakeholders, Petersburg has been one of, if not the most active participant. And keeping all of these for the long term, especially with grant programs now that, especially from the EPA, that are requiring partnerships with non-governmental organizations or community-based organizations, sort of having this long-term human capital is really important for implementing, especially environmental sustainability and mitigation initiatives.
Thank you, Luke. So next we'll move on to thinking about fiscal responsibility and economic diversity. So when we talk about economic resilience, this is essentially speaking to a locality or a region's ability to anticipate, withstand, and bounce back from disruptions or shocks. So these can certainly include external shocks. The COVID pandemic is a really relevant example of that, but also internal shocks, such as turnover in government or the closure of a major employer. So Petersburg's economy has been historically driven by manufacturing. It was very much a tobacco town. Brown and Williamson was one of the city's major employers. They were a major manufacturer of cigarettes. And Brown and Williamson really dominated the region's economy for some time. There were also several other large manufacturers in Petersburg as well. Some of the largest eyeglass and luggage manufacturers in the Southeast had locations in Petersburg. However, Brown and Williamson shut its doors in 1986, and this essentially led to an exodus of wealthy families out of the city. And unfortunately, there was never really an employer that kind of filled that gap for jobs. So as the economy of Petersburg continued to struggle, the city essentially became overwhelmed with demand for social services and assistance. And among other reasons, the city's finances more or less collapsed in 2015. Petersburg also served as the retail hub of Southside Virginia until around the time when Brown and Williamson left in 1986. Colonial Heights is now serving as the region's retail center. Petersburg's economic resurgence has been fueled by stability in governance and by embracing a new type of manufacturing. So COVID kind of highlighted the need for domestic small-scale pharmaceutical manufacturing. As Naomi mentioned, the area is being really heavily marketed as a biotech hub and is currently anchored by 3 small-scale pharmaceutical manufacturers. The hope is that long-term, Petersburg will be able to leverage these manufacturers in order to attract support services. So businesses such as suppliers, laboratories, research, product development, in effect creating an ecosystem. The rise of e-commerce has also been beneficial for Petersburg and for the Richmond metro region. You've seen warehousing and distribution uses becoming more and more common. And because of Petersburg's strong transportation infrastructure through interstates 85 and 95, as well as its ease of access to Richmond, Washington, D.C., other East Coast population centers, the city has received quite a bit of interest in recent years in warehousing and distribution. Self-employment and entrepreneurship are really important pieces of overall community resilience because they both foster competition and adaptability. So the gig economy has grown quite a bit in Petersburg. Remote work could fall under this category. Petersburg's seen a rise of remote workers even after the pandemic has kind of subsided and more people have returned to the office. Petersburg is continuing to see an uptick in remote work. And then Petersburg is wanting to better support its residents who are self-employed, entrepreneurs, and remote workers as another means of diversifying its economy. And then I really want to highlight talent pipeline development. This is the piece that is really tying all of this together for Petersburg and is going to be really crucial in continuing to build this long-term economic resiliency. So Petersburg and its economic development partners have been really proactive at developing educational opportunities that are specifically tailored for these emerging industries. So Brightpoint Community College and the Community College Workforce Alliance, which serves Southside Virginia, are now offering programs in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And this is a win-win because it's plugging local residents very seamlessly into education and then providing these pharmaceutical manufacturers and support businesses with well-trained available employment. The Richard Bland College of William and Mary also has the FAME program, and this combines college coursework with paid on-the-job advanced manufacturing experience. Richard Bland also has a partnership with the Petersburg City Public School System to get high school students into this program, again, creating a direct talent pipeline for the region's employers. Virginia State University also has incentives for graduates who teach in the public school system immediately after graduating. And then VSU also has a Center for Entrepreneurship with emphasis on serving minorities and veterans, again, making sure that all populations in the community have the opportunity to succeed. So again, these workforce and talent pipelines are really Petersburg's key to success. Petersburg is currently working with local economic development organizations to think about offering regular small business forums. And there's also a desire to maintain a viable revolving loan fund to assist in micro lending to entrepreneurs through their EDA. They're also thinking about facilitating development of a co-working space to attract remote workers, and wanting another campus of Brightpoint Community College in the city limits to create new pathways for building community wealth, really beneficial to households who do not have a reliable automobile or otherwise cannot readily access transportation. Strategic planning, helping build long-term resilience through some more targeted planning for economic development, thinking about specific economic development strategic plans in the future. And then the city has already kind of been working through this now in the Old Town area with the development of a downtown master plan. It's important to note that continuing stable and successful administration also goes a long way in helping facilitate community resiliency. Petersburg does not currently have a CIP and has not had one for the last several years. And so capital improvements planning will ensure that the infrastructure is able to support and attract economic development while enhancing overall quality of life. Strategic planning for infrastructure. The city's water and sewer system is very old. There are still some areas of the city that do not have water and sewer infrastructure. And so making sure that the city is planning strategically for expanding capacity, expanding systems where needed, and then taking all of the information and using that to drive economic development and provide siting guidance to potential employers. Land use, again, is a big factor in long-term economic resiliency. And so Petersburg really wants to communicate through its land use policies the type of economic development it wants to prioritize. And so Petersburg does not currently have a UDA, urban development area, in accordance with the Code of Virginia. However, through the comp plan update, a new UDA is being designated in the southern area of the city. This is essentially intended to coordinate transportation investment with mixed use and industrial development, also opening doors to the city for additional grant funding. Wanting to be flexible with future land use map designations. So it's oftentimes easy with a future land use map to focus more on a density base, but we really wanted to shift that and focus more on the character. So focusing whether or not a particular development is complementing existing character or working towards that desired character if the surrounding area is undeveloped. So kind of thinking about it as taking a form-based approach rather than a density-based approach to allow for greater flexibility as new uses or development trends occur. And then framing of these designations goes a long way. So Petersburg's light industrial area, we have kind of reframed to call research and development. So being really clear with the land use map that Petersburg wants to see research and development uses. They want to see well-paying, stable job opportunities that are going to benefit the community, and being clear about where in the city these uses can go, the guidelines for design. And then again, this will be really helpful in teeing them up for a successful zoning ordinance rewrite. Again, some quick highlight of key strategies: developing a comprehensive economic development strategic plan, maintaining a viable revolving loan fund, as Naomi mentioned earlier, trying to be more business friendly. So looking to automate all permitting and licensing processes through an online platform, developing strategic plans, and making good use of city facilities. Last but not least, I am going to talk really quickly about social cohesion and equity, as equity is at the heart of it all. Meaningful community engagement is certainly the key in developing a comprehensive plan. We were really fortunate to have broad community support throughout this process. We had focus groups, workshops, open houses. We got to work with high school students, trying to get a variety of perspectives in order to make sure the comprehensive plan is really driven by the community and prioritizing their needs and concerns over the future. So equity is certainly interwoven through all of the elements of the comprehensive plan, but there are three in particular for Petersburg, where strategies and intervention will go a really long way in building widespread social cohesion. So housing is certainly one of those areas. We wanted to make sure that the approach to housing was driven by area median income, trying to avoid using jargon. As planners, it's often really easy to kind of slip into using affordable housing or workforce housing even to frame our housing conversations. But this can be difficult because the community or elected officials don't understand what we mean when we say workforce housing or affordable housing, or there's a misperception, there's NIMBY. And so kind of wanting to shift the focus towards area median income. So the plan has an analysis of how many households in the city are making 20%, 50%, 80% of the AMI, and then at or above, in order to provide some more specific direction for what types of housing interventions are the most needed. This is beneficial in kind of breaking down those barriers with jargon and advancing the argument for housing diversity, especially when it comes to amending the zoning ordinance. Blight is a pretty widespread concern throughout Petersburg. It's concentrated in predominantly low-income minority neighborhoods. And so we want to set up the city well for being able to address blight and have investment in neighborhoods without displacement. So thinking about a very targeted, comprehensive blight abatement plan, again, proactively involving the community in that process, asking them what they want to see in their neighborhood, rewriting the zoning ordinance to try and support that process of investment without displacing communities. Community wellness and public safety are also really important. It's really easy to silo wellness and public safety in particular kind of as separate, unrelated topics. Public safety in particular, kind of thinking about it only in terms of funding and staffing, but also recognizing the impacts that land use have on wellness and safety. So community paramedicine is a recommendation for Petersburg, something they'll be looking into. This is kind of a partnership between law enforcement, hospitals, and nonprofits to address mental health crises and substance abuse disorders in particular. So they kind of pool funding together. There's also federal grant funding together. And the benefit is essentially that mental health professionals are being integrated into emergency response. Trauma-informed care is being integrated into the response. This also helps frequent visitors to the emergency department reduce the number of visits while still providing high-quality care. A bikeways plan, this was kind of developed in a partnership between the city of Petersburg and some nonprofit organizations in the city. The bikeways plan is intended to prioritize access in neighborhoods that both lack existing bike and ped infrastructure and are less likely to have their own personal vehicle. So looking for equity both in the location of bikeways, but also in the type of bikeways, wanting to make sure that bikeways are not only accessible, but they're safe to use. So identifying where they should be located and whether that bikeway is a shared use path, a widened shoulder, a dedicated bike lane, an on-road bike lane, making sure that is clear. Community hubs, which are essentially community centers that are providing valuable services to the community. That could include primary care, tutoring, a pop-up farmers market, thinking about how underserved neighborhoods would be able to have access to basic needs they would not be able to otherwise access. Public schools can also serve as community hubs. And then I'll jump to CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, recognizing that the physical environment goes a long way in deterring crime if designed appropriately. Again, wanting to be sure that the connection between land use and development and safety impacts was clear, that it was not siloed, and so the city can respond cohesively and effectively. Emergency preparedness and disaster response, making sure that mental health professionals and social workers are involved in post-disaster recovery and collaboration efforts as disasters arise. Again, some key strategies, supporting missing middle housing through a zoning ordinance update, creating and promoting a community land trust program, developing an opioid abatement strategy, including neighborhood-specific strategies for crime prevention and small area plans, and ensuring that any support of micro-mobility is coupled with committed investments in bike lanes, streetlights, and complete streets. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Naomi to conclude today. She's going to talk a little bit about the implementation process.
Great. So yes, as all you can see, we've been working with the Berkeley group, and they've really got us a roadmap with this comprehensive plan. So next slide. So we really want to just continue this momentum. We have a lot of people on board, excited. So that's why we're going to hop right into the zoning rewrite and address a lot of the issues that Caroline had been discussing. How do we add missing middle? How do we incorporate a form-based code? How do we make the city more walkable, require sidewalks, anything like that with new development? So we're really excited to move forward with that. And then, as we talked about, education, that's something that's just going to be ongoing. So we can share with council and the community that we're moving forward in a direction that's going to help the community in terms of becoming a healthier city, in terms of becoming a more walkable and engaging and attractive city to those that live here and those that want to live here. And then again, like I mentioned, that implementation aspect is really what we're excited about and excited to move forward with. And I see we do have a question here in the Q&A asking about implementation. When we worked with the Berkeley group, we made sure that our strategies that are in there don't use soft language. So it'll be clear when we've addressed it. So we don't have any language in there that's like support this or encourage this. What we have in there is have this meeting held quarterly. Make sure we reach this number. Make sure you accomplish this by this deadline and this person is responsible for it. So we're pretty excited that it's going to be really easy to measure. We've already taken a look. I know adoption isn't until May, but this is our next step forward. We've taken a look at what needs to be done by 2026, and we're going to break it down over the next few years to make sure we're meeting those tasks that we're responsible for and encouraging those in different departments to be completed as the years go on. And then our last slide, it's our contact information. If you have questions, if you need us, you can reach us at this information. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes, and I see that there are a few questions in the chat as well. Earlier on in the presentation, Alex Long had asked how much detail and emphasis should be placed in the comp plan as to local government in terms of management, financing, and accountability.
I can jump in, and then Naomi or Luke, if you have things to add, feel free. There is a section in Petersburg's comp plan that does address local government management. So kind of talking broadly about the goals of city council and city manager and running the city essentially. Something we did place a lot of emphasis on was the need for both interdepartmental collaboration, but also collaboration between city council and the various boards and commissions of the city. It can be really easy to be siloed, and that's something that has been happening in Petersburg, but kind of encouraging progress to be made through collaborating cohesively. As far as financing goes, we didn't talk about that too much. The implementation matrix that Naomi was just talking about kind of serves as accountability. In addition to having those really specific strategies, we did also identify a responsible department, a general cost, kind of generally whether it was more expensive, less expensive. And then we also indicated the year for completion. So that also kind of serves as a measure of accountability to city council, but also is very transparent and clear for the community as to what the city intends to do when.
Thank you, Caroline. And just a lot of positive comments coming in as well regarding the presentation as a whole. So again, thank you. We have a question from Brian Sweats who says, have you begun thinking about what incentives you would put in your zoning ordinance? Does Petersburg have the development pressure to make incentives effective?
Sure, we're super excited. Even right now, as we look first into our tree ordinance with the partnership with the Green Infrastructure Center, we definitely want to look at incentives. So the opportunity to encourage people to preserve trees, plant trees, and so forth by allowing them to do cluster development or potentially do stormwater management on a different location or add additional density to their development. So we're definitely keep taking these into consideration now with just our tree ordinance, and we'll be looking at that as well as we move forward with our zoning ordinance. But I do like the question, it got skipped, the no CIP question. Yes, no CIP. We do have a meeting this week though to talk about a potential improvement plan. So I am so excited. It might actually happen. We might actually get something on the road. I've already shared all of the different projects that we want to do in the next 5 years from the comp plan. So hopefully we can get something going and get this vision outlined for improvements for the future of Petersburg.
Thank you, Naomi. We might have time for one last question that just came in. Alex is asking, how do you work with tree debris such as limbs and dead trees?
So this was a great question for when I worked in San Diego when they had palm trees everywhere, because that amount of debris is very significant when a palm falls down. Right now, this is what we're kind of focusing on. As you can see, those trees on Sycamore Street that I shared, those got completely cut down because they weren't maintained. That was the issue. They weren't cut to make sure that they were growing in the proper way. They weren't pruned correctly. They were breaking through the sidewalk. While we work with the Green Infrastructure Center, we're going to be coming up with not only a plan for where to plant, but also a plan on how to properly maintain trees, as well as we're going to have training events as well to deal with pruning and planting and mulching and so forth.
Thank you. And I know that all of our speakers are very welcome to continuing the conversation after the webinar in our follow-up with all of you attendees. In our follow-up email, we will include the email contacts of all of our speakers. So if you think of a question that you didn't get a chance to ask this afternoon, I know that they're happy to be a resource. And we'll also be sharing the slide deck and the link to the recording, which will be on the YouTube channel in a couple of days. But I really just want to thank Luke, Naomi, and Caroline so very much for sharing your important work and for your time this afternoon, and for everybody for attending. I don't know if our speakers have anything else they'd like to conclude with, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Jillian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jillian. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.